The life and leadership of Sir Winston Churchill. The life of Winston Churchill consisted of a plethora of events and circumstances which led to the climax of his leadership career in World War II and post-World War II. His influence in the war was unparalleled. Churchill was born in 1874 to Lord Randolph Churchill. Because of his father's wealth, he was well educated. However, he was at the bottom of his class throughout his school years. Because of this, he was taught English rather than Latin or another well-regarded language. This extensive study of the English language turned out to be to his advantage, as he became an avid writer and master of oration as an adult. By the age of 26, he was surrounded by politics, economics, social policy, defense, foreign affairs, and the empire. He served as head of most of the principal departments of state. He also shared in the supreme direction of World War I as First Lord of the Admiralty. His leadership in World War II was the climax of his lifelong career. On May 10, 1940, Churchill was appointed Prime Minister of Britain. He adopted the title of Prime Minister of Defense, by which he assumed responsibility for directing the chiefs of staff in their conduct of the war. When he ran again for Prime Minister in 1945, he lost the election. However, he was re-elected in 1951. He only served 4 years of this term, however, before resigning in 1955 due to his declining health. Some other notable aspects of Churchill's life are that he served as the leader of the opposition to the Labour government from 1945 to 1951, was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953, and he died in January 1965. The most well-known role of leadership in the life of Winston Churchill is his role during and immediately following World War II. This was the climax of Churchill's career and will be the focus of our study. When Churchill came to the position of Prime Minister in 1940, Hitler's expansion of the German Empire had been 7 years in the making. The German Blitzkrieg of Poland in 1939 occurred shortly before Churchill was appointed, and Britain refused to declare an end to the war as Hitler had expected. As Britain sought allies in the war against Germany, the beginnings of World War II emerged. During World War II, Churchill played a crucial role in encouraging the nation to support and rally for the war against Germany. He also made many critical and influential decisions in the strategy of war. In May 1945, Germany surrendered, and Churchill became known as one of the 3 great men who helped win the war. After the war, in 1946, Churchill gave a speech warning of the threat of Communist Russia, which stopped the United States' retreat into isolation after the war and led to the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As do all leaders, Sir Winston Churchill experienced both success and failure in his position of leadership. As do all leaders, Sir Winston Churchill experienced both success and failures in his position of leadership. His first failure in leadership was one which had to do with his attitude. Churchill was once described as an egotistical self-advertiser and opportunistic chameleon. One example of how his attitude affected his leadership was during World War I. While leading the Gallipoli operation, Churchill made some rash decisions, blinded by his desire for victory and glory. These decisions caused the failure of the operation and led to lack of trust among his peers in government for many years afterward. His next failure has a flip side. Churchill was seen as a wartime prime minister. As World War II came to an end, he made an effort towards social reform in Britain, but was not able to convince the people to support his efforts. However, under the stress of war, he was very effective in making decisions and rallying support under pressure and a sense of urgency. One of his most prominent successes was his ability to gain the trust of the people of Britain through his excellent oration skills. Though he made many questionable decisions in the war, such as the bombings of civilian towns in Germany, these decisions went unquestioned. Churchill had painted Germany as an enemy to be defeated at all costs, effectively gaining the support of the nation of Great Britain in the war effort. Another one of Churchill's successes was his foresight at the beginning of World War II. In 1936, He knew the German invasion of Rhineland, if left unopposed, would bolster the confidence of the already self-assured Hitler. Although he was not in a position of influence over the situation at the time, Churchill was present and aware of the looming threat of Hitler's Germany. This awareness led him to make the decision to pursue war against Germany soon after he took power, a decision which changed the world, overthrowing the threat of the German Empire. Finally, Churchill created a foundation for an alliance with the United States and the Soviet Union. He worked with Roosevelt and Stalin to develop a united strategy against the Axis powers and helped craft the post-war world with the United Nations as its centerpiece. Churchill's leadership style was very effective during the war. He was astute and very public in his leadership. He had his own objectives, but he also brought the world together. Ethically speaking, Churchill was utilitarian. His goals of protecting his island outweighed regular ethical considerations. He realized that the time of normal rules of war had long gone. Procrastination had set Great Britain in a position of urgency, and German expansion needed to cease. He was prepared to allow women to take up arms in defense of his country. He was unapologetic in his oration style, speaking brashly and unconcerned with appearance. In a characteristic address to the War Cabinet concerning the potential negotiations with Mussolini, Churchill painted a graphic version of unyielding patriotism, saying, "If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground." Another aspect of Churchill's leadership style was his sense of democracy, which was likely influenced by the government of Great Britain. Churchill delegated responsibility to loyal friends and trusted those beneath him, treating them as equals with himself. Discernment was also crucial to Churchill's leadership style. He was able to see the rising power of Hitler and inevitability of war when so many others were blinded to it. He also made the world aware of the threat of communist Russia in the wake of World War II, when so many chose to ignore this emerging superpower. A third element of Churchill's leadership style is his collaboration with other leaders. Churchill facilitated the alliance between Stalin and Roosevelt, helping to form the United Nations. He also called out the Allied powers at the beginning of World War II in a joint effort against the Axis powers. Finally, Churchill's leadership style used oration as his primary means of uniting the people under a common cause. Through his speeches, Churchill brought together first the nation of Great Britain, then the Allied nations, against the Axis powers. His speeches were described as brutally forthright, morally unflinching, and possessed of a poet's touch that stirred the hearts of England and the world. These speeches guided a nation's perception of war and influenced the beginnings of what would eventually become NATO and the United Nations. Churchill's mastery of the English language in his literature and speeches makes him stand out among world leaders. In his lifetime, Churchill wrote 43 books published in 72 volumes. He received a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953 for his mastery of historical and biographical description, as well as for brilliant oratory in defending exalted human values. Two of his most important works were The Second World War, a reflective history written in 6 volumes, and A History of the English-Speaking Peoples, a history of Britain and its former colonies written in 4 volumes. Both were mentioned in his Nobel Prize in Literature citation. In addition to writing books, Churchill was also an exceptional orator. He gave many speeches in his lifetime. However, there are several which stand out in history as having a profound influence. Churchill is known for his role in encouraging the nation into war against Germany. In 1940, Winston Churchill gave several speeches in the House of Commons. On May 14th, his first speech in office, he said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And you ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word. It is victory. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival." On June 4th, "We shall go on to the end. We shall never surrender." On June 18th, let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. And on August 20th, in praise of the RAF pilots, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. In 1946, after the Second World War, Churchill gave a speech warning about the threat of Soviet Russia. He coins a term you may recognize when he states, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent." On his 80th birthday, November 30th, 1954, Churchill explained his role in the war. I am very glad Mr. Attlee described my speeches in the war as expressing the will not only of Parliament, but of the whole nation. If I found the right words, you must remember that I have always earned my living by my pen and by my tongue. It was the nation and race dwelling all around the globe that had the lion heart. I had the luck to be called upon to give the roar. Finally, on March 1st, 1955, Churchill concluded his final speech as Prime Minister with the following words: "The day may dawn when fair play, love for one's fellow men, respect for justice and freedom, will enable tormented generations to march forth serene and triumphant from the hideous epoch in which we have to dwell. Meanwhile, never flinch, never weary, never despair." In conclusion, though his strong rhetoric was off-putting in times of peace and fell on deaf ears, in wartime his eloquence and illustrative candor gave hope and vision to a nation that many thought would succumb to German expansion. He knew what was best for Great Britain and ruthlessly fought for her preservation, rallying hundreds of thousands in support of one of the biggest wars in the world's history. When his island was backed into a corner, this uncompromising orator and warlord emerged as the savior of the UK. Churchill is considered a great leader because of his ability to speak and bring thousands of people together under a common conviction. Sir Winston Churchill was a great leader in history. As we close, listen to how one man describes him. As a man of great words, this eloquent description serves him well. A devotee of action who thrived on challenge and crisis, a student, historian, and veteran of war, a statesman who was master of the arts of politics despite or because of long political exile, a man of iron constitution, inexhaustible energy, and total concentration. He seemed to have been nursing all his faculties so that when the moment came, he could lavish them on the salvation of Britain and the values he believed Britain stood for in the world.